The King of Limbs was released in 2011. It is Radiohead's 8th studio album. Ever since its release, The King of Limbs has been part of many heated debates in the music community. There are people that like this album. There are people that hate this album. There are people that think The King of Limbs is underrated. There are people that think that The King of Limbs is the worst album Radiohead has ever made, or the weakest, depending on whatever context you want to put it. If you have been paying attention to the Radiohead fanbase since 2011, chances are you know how contentious The King of Limbs is. Now, even though Radiohead is known for changing their sound a little bit from time to time, even though not every single album is different from one another in terms of sound, The King of Limbs does sound very different in comparison to the albums that came before it and one album since. The one thing you will notice throughout this entire record is that there is an extensive amount of looping throughout the entirety of The King of Limbs, and this was done on purpose. But because of the contentious response that The King of Limbs received ever since its release, I think the extensive looping bit Radiohead in the ass. The King of Limbs is also the shortest Radiohead album ever made at the time of recording this review. It's about 35 to 37 minutes. But to its credit, it does start off nicely with Bloom. Now, even though one could criticize Bloom for having repetitive drumming because of the looping that is used in the entirety of The King of Limbs, the song is actually catchy for an intro track to The King of Limbs, and I'll say this is actually one of the better songs in the album. As I stated before, I think the looping bites Radiohead in the ass when it comes to The King of Limbs, because starting with Morning Mr. Magpie, The King of Limbs becomes boring. And that's because they thought, oh, let's loop the drummings that Philip Sutway provided and just repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over. The other instrumentation is fine, but where's the fun in that? And it doesn't help that Little by Little and Feral are just as repetitive and boring as Morning Mr. Magpie. And as for Feral, I think it's one of the worst Radiohead songs in any of their albums. I cannot understand a fucking thing Tom York is saying in this song, because he has a certain nasally vocal effect with another effect tacked on it. I can't understand what he's saying. And speaking of Tom York, I like the guy. He can pump out good material, whether it's his solo work or with Radiohead. But when it comes to The King of Limbs, it comes off as him ego-wanking throughout the entire production of this album. And that's what's disappointing to me. But what baffles me about The King of Limbs is how quickly it picks itself back up, starting with Lotus Flower. Lotus Flower is definitely a track you can dance to. I'm serious. It's pretty catchy. Now, even though Lotus Flower is catchy, Tom York's dancing in the music video of Lotus Flower became a meme before Radiohead's albums became a meme. Hell, someone even made a parody of the CSI episode with Justin Bieber in it where his character gets shot. And don't we all wish that episode went out like this?
Hold your fire.
Stay down.
Well, it's either that or Zoolander 2, but let's get back on topic. Lotus Flower is easily the highlight of The King of Limbs. I can't really compare it to another song that I like more than it. After the catchiest track of The King of Limbs is Codex, which is slower in comparison, but relaxing with piano instrumentation. And it actually fits in nicely in where it is placed in The King of Limbs. What follows is Give Up the Ghost, which is actually one of my favorite tracks in The King of Limbs, probably my second favorite song in this album. It's got beautiful acoustic guitar playing, and Tom York's vocals actually complement the song very well. The funny thing is, I originally didn't like this song at first because of the backing looping vocals with "Don't Hurt Me" that Tom York provides with the looping vocals. But what Tom York also sings in the forefront is actually nice, and having the backing repetitive vocals actually suits the type of song that Give Up the Ghost is. And that's why I've grown to appreciate it when I keep revisiting The King of Limbs, even though I have to sit through the boring crap before I get to the good stuff. The King of Limbs concludes with Separator, which I find to be the weakest closing track to a Radiohead album I've ever heard. I am baffled at how inconsistent The King of Limbs is. And when it comes to the debate of which Radiohead album is the worst, you're either going to hear Pablo Honey or The King of Limbs. So, after I'm done talking about all the tracks, what do I think of The King of Limbs? It would have been better as a Tom York solo album, because out of all the albums Radiohead's released, The King of Limbs is the most inconsistent. The King of Limbs is also right after In Rainbows in Radiohead's discography. And even though I would say Pablo Honey is also boring, I give it some slack because it was Radiohead's debut album. The King of Limbs, on the other hand, was released after 7 studio albums, so I cannot cut The King of Limbs some slack for that. But if anyone asks me, I think The King of Limbs is Radiohead's weakest album. I'm going to be shooting a 4.5 out of 10 for The King of Limbs. Well, now that I'm done talking about The King of Limbs, I have one more Radiohead album to review, and that's A Moon-Shaped Pool. I have special plans for that review, and I hope you look forward to my eventual review of Radiohead's A Moon-Shaped Pool. Just bear with me on how long that's going to take, but I assure you the wait will be worth it. And until my next review, good day and good night.